I'm not online. This is a notice for all participants. This is a public meeting and proceedings are being webcast live online. A recording will also be available for playback on the Council's website shortly afterwards. Please note that your name will appear in the live stream and in the recording. Should you not wish for your image to appear on these, please turn your camera off. Third parties should not record or film the local plan hearing sessions, and neither the Council nor the Planning Inspectorate are liable for any third-party recordings. Thank you.
Okay, good morning everyone. It's just gone 9:30, so it's time for me to resume the hearing sessions as part of the examination of Tunbridge Wells for a local plan. Hopefully everybody can see and hear me okay. Yeah. Welcome back for those of you who have attended previous sessions, and welcome along for those of you who haven't attended any of the sessions thus far. My name is Matthew Birkinshaw, Chartered Town Planner and the Inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to hold the examination. I noticed that there's a few sort of new names and faces around the virtual table today, so I'll quickly go through some housekeeping matters. Before I do so, I can just hand over to Charlotte and ask Charlotte to turn her camera and microphone on. Charlotte is the programme officer for the examination, so I'll just ask Charlotte to say hello if she's there. Yeah. So any administrative queries with regard to today's session, or the examination as a whole, such as documents, attending sessions, links for sessions, etc., please do contact Charlotte. Her contact details are on the examination webpage. Charlotte, anything from yourself this morning?
No, only just to advise people that my colleague is stepping in for me for this afternoon, and depending on how long the session. So his name's Chris Banks, and he will say, it says Programme Officer on the screen, so just so everyone's aware. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. So this afternoon is a separate session with a separate sign-in as well. So I'll very quickly, as I have done on previous days, I'll very quickly run through the technology and also the purpose of the local plan examination hearings. So the hearing's an opportunity for people to put their representations across and put their points forward. What generally will happen today and for the remainder of the sessions is we'll work through the matters, issues and questions document. So I've raised various main issues and asked questions of the council on their site allocations, which is what we're talking about now. And that's having regard to the representations that have been made. So we'll work through the matters, issues and questions document. So the hearings are informal, structured discussions. There's no detailed presentation of evidence. There's no detailed cross-examination of any expert witnesses or anything like that.
generally what will happen is I'll ask questions of the council to start with, and understand some of the soundness issues and main issues that I've raised. Obviously, I'll then invite participants to engage in the discussion and the debate, and would welcome that. What I would just say is more than happy for people to participate in the discussion, but please do stick to the representations that you've made. So the hearing is an opportunity to allow people to put their points forward, but it's not an opportunity to introduce any new or additional points that you haven't previously raised. With regards to technology, it seems to be working quite well this week. I think we've only had a couple of minor problems. So for those of you who maybe haven't used Zoom or this technology before, there was a guidance note circulated. I'll very quickly go through some sort of quick housekeeping matters. If everybody can keep their cameras and microphones turned off, apart from myself and the council's sort of main team members who will be answering questions today. When you wish to speak, if you use the raise hand function within Zoom, so I've got it in two different places, I think, but along the bottom it says participants, chat, which is disabled, share screen, record, and reactions. So if you click on reactions, there's a raise hand function there, which I can do, and then I can lower it again. So if you do wish to speak, if you use the raise hand function, I've got a list of all the participants and I can then see who wishes to speak. I'll then bring you in at that stage. And if it's the first time you've spoken today, just for the benefit of others, if you could just introduce yourself when you first speak. So if you could let me know who you are, if you're acting on behalf of a particular client or landowner or local residents group, or even if you're just a local resident and what your interest in today's session is, that would be much appreciated. Today we're moving on to look at the site allocations, and I've noticed from the participant list today that the majority of people are down to attend under the RTW 5 site, which is land south of Spelthurst Road. So given that the majority of people are here today to discuss that site, what I'll do is we'll take that site first, if that's okay with the council. Yeah, we'll take that site first, and then that may lead us up to a break. And then obviously if people wanted to leave, you know, after they've said their bit on those sites, then we can take a break, and I'm more than happy for people to then leave the meeting if they so wish. Obviously, equally more than happy for people to continue in attendance. Before we get going, then, anything from the council this morning?
Not from us, sir. Thank you very much. No.
Nope. Okay, what we'll do then, I'll just open my relevant documents. So we'll slightly rejig the matters, issues and questions then, and we'll go with land south of Spelthurst Road, which is ALRTW5 first, if we may. Me, because I'm also rejigging my own agenda to do that, but here we go. Okay, so land south of Spelthurst Road, then we've touched upon this site in terms of the overall strategy and some of the higher level issues. This site's already been touched upon by others at hearings. So obviously this is now the time to get into some of the detail around this allocation. So I think what I'll do is I'll start by handing over to the council, and we'll go through the matters, issues and questions. And the first question to understand with this site then is how the scale of residential development has been determined, and also as part of answering that question, how the site layout plan, so this is map 5 I think within the plan, how the site layout plan has been determined as well, because this is an allocation where you have a much wider red line, and then you've got a different area for proposed residential development. So just hand over to the council just to introduce myself and the hearing then, how the extent of proposed residential came about with this allocation.
I'm going to ask Sharon Evans to lead on this, please, sir.
Good morning. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, just trying to work out the technology. Yes, okay, so I turn to page 48 of the council statement, where we deal with this issue that the inspectors raised.
Sharon, excuse me. Are you able to put your camera on?
Yes, let me. Sorry, there you go.
That's better, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, just getting used to it. Yeah, so I'll start again though. So yeah, page 48 of the council statement refers to the inspector's question 27, which is the scale of development. And I think we've set out quite clearly in the statement how we've arrived at the allocation, and that takes account of the evidence base that that's been carried out to inform the local plan. That includes how we've assessed the site through the Sheila process, and then the other evidence base that has informed that assessment, including the Greenbelt study primarily, and that's the stage 1, stage 2, and the stage 3 study. But in particular, the stage 2 study, which looked at the parcels of land within this area. Initially, a larger parcel, which was considered, and that's set out at paragraph 128 of the statement. And then following that work, the stage 2 Greenbelt study, it looked at a smaller, more distinct parcel of land, which was seen to be less sensitive in Greenbelt purposes, and we set that out clearly there. And then going forward with the stage 3 Greenbelt study, this looked at the site in more detail and confirmed the sort of this area that would be suitable for development. And that is reflected in the site layout plan in the local plan at page 91. So it's map 5, where the area that's considered suitable for built development is the northern part of the site, and then the southern extent to be retained as an open space and landscape buffer, and that area of the site wouldn't be released from the Greenbelt. It's only the northern part that would be released from the Greenbelt. And then in terms of the sort of scale of development within the site itself, it's taking account of the nature of the site, the sort of sensitivities that has led to the quantum of development that we've proposed for the allocation, which is 100 residential dwellings in that area.
So is this predominantly led by the existing landscaping features then? So obviously there's the area of woodland to the west running along the south.
Yeah.
And is that in the council position then a sort of a physical and visual buffer that would presumably sort of help retain and enclose this development as part of the wider urban area then, essentially?
Yes, and also it's also been informed by the council's landscape sensitivity study for land around Royal Tunbridge Wells, which we referred to at paragraph 126 of our statement.
So just a quick question in terms of so the area of landscaping or the existing woodland, so the west and the south, so that's not been taken out of the green belt, so that would remain within the green belt.
Yeah.
But it would be part of the site allocation red line.
Yeah.
So what's the reasoning behind that then, if the council presumably wants this to be sort of retained as this existing landscaped wooded area? What's the reason for including it rather than just having a site allocation which just excludes the woodland altogether?
Just to provide some, I guess, some certainty that southern area would be retained for landscape and buffering purposes. It was felt it was better to include it within that allocated area to ensure that.
So if I could draw attention to requirement 8 in the policy. Extensive green infrastructure shall be provided both on the areas shown indicatively in green and elsewhere where relevant, by it being included within the allocation, forming part of future development. It enables the council to ensure long-term maintenance of the site through section 106 and conditions, and indeed enhancement of that where relevant. So again, the requirement 9, future long-term management of the pasture, and particularly woodland retained for landscape. There is a pasture. You can see it on the in the aerial photograph, which is provided in the council's hearing statement.
Yeah.
There
Page
is a
52.
Thank you, says Evans. Yes, so that's the area of pasture, and again, including that allows for that long-term management through its inclusion in the site and those 2 requirements of the policy.
So you'd be expecting essentially application stage. The red line would be the whole allocation, and then there'd be some future sort of management of that area as part of the wider residential scheme. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Before we get into anything to do with access or anything like that, just take any views or comments thus far from any participants who've made comments just about the site boundary and what we've heard. I'll go to Mr. Rook, please. Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, you're on.
Yep. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, hi, good morning. So my name is Matt Rook. I'm representing the local residents group called the Spelthurst Road Community Action Group, and we have around 300 local members. I mean, this is my first time speaking and attending at this kind of event, but I just wondered whether at this point where we're talking about question 7, which is around whether the location is either appropriate or justified, I wanted to make the point that we as local residents feel that this is our first opportunity to be basically arguing against the fact that this proposed development is appropriate in the current location. As you probably are aware, this is, I believe, the only development that was included at the very last minute between Regulation 18 in November 2020 and then Regulation 19 in February 2021. And it would seem to me that what we're supposed to be arguing, if we were following the proper procedure, is that everybody is given the opportunity to discuss the inclusion of a site such as this, particularly one that is so contentious, where it's releasing such a pristine area of greenbelt land, whereas in actual fact where we find ourselves is trying to argue for this land to be taken out of the plan. In fact, it's a matter of record that when there was this exceptional hearing on February the 3rd, no less than 12 councillors hadn't actually been able to see this, the details for this site allocation whatsoever, and were asked to vote on that. In fact, the public had neither seen it, and at that stage, the Greenbelt Study 3 wasn't available. So what the councillors found themselves doing, whilst they voted for the plan, they were voting for the overall plan of 13,000 homes for fear of the experience of the Sevenoaks Council, because they were desperate not to find themselves in that situation. Whereas what I believe should happen, and all of the local members also agree, is that this is the first time anyone has given us the opportunity to discuss the merits of this site being allocated in the plan. And that seems to me the incorrect process. We seem to be doing this in reverse. So I would like to make the point that the whole line principle that we're now talking and getting into the situation of the specifics of the site boundaries, the tree line, and all the other points we're about to be discussing, we shouldn't even be at this stage. This site isn't justified to be already at this late stage in the application process. And I'm sure we'll talk about more specifics in a while. But, you know, as you may know, we actually took this to tribunal and managed to raise some funds locally to argue against it. Unfortunately, we didn't win. However, the judge did conclude broadly on 3 points that the council had been remiss in making sure the documents were available for everyone to see in advance of that February the 3rd meeting. Furthermore, that the members of the public hadn't had any opportunity, and in fact, even any prior knowledge of this site allocation. However, she did rule in summary that even if that had been the case, she didn't think that the ruling would have been any different, which actually is against, it is not the correct legal procedure. But furthermore, she said, well, when it gets into the final stage, now you'll have your opportunity to make those points and have this consultation period, which is what we're doing today. But it feels to me that this is already far too late in the process. We shouldn't be having to argue to take it back out at the point at which we're this close to a decision being made. That's all I've got to say for now. Thank you.
You referred to the February the 3rd meeting. Just talk to me about that. So just try and get me to understand. So this site was put forward within the plan by the council in the submission version plan. That was then consulted on, and people could make comments on and representations, and they're the representations that I've seen. And then the council, presumably, the plan went to sort of full council meeting, and it was then decided to submit the plan to the Secretary of State for examination. So just help me understand what was the meeting, the specific meeting that you're referring to on the February.
So I'm not a minute. So my understanding, it was initially put forward in the PSLP stage, and a number of local residents rejected, and the plan was rejected. When it was then the final one at Regulation 18, at that stage, our land was not considered appropriate, and the application for the local developers rejected. At that stage, it was still Greenbelt high, whatever that category is, high land for the Greenbelt study. And essentially all the local residents breathed a sigh of relief. And that was as late as the Regulation 19, I think, which is towards the end of November 2020. What happened on the February the 3rd, specifically to try and answer your question, February the 3rd meeting was this special meeting of the council. And that's when they were putting forward the entire plan for the borough for the full 13,000 homes. What happened at that stage was, for the first time, our allocation, the RTW 5, was included for the first time at that stage. All of a sudden, the Greenbelt land for our little corner was downgraded from high to moderate to low. We had developers then approved, and the plan for our site was included. And what's on record are a number of the local councillors hadn't actually been able to see the documents and read it in advance of that meeting. Well, at the time it's sort of COVID, but there were password protection issues. So we know of 12 councillors that had no previous site an opportunity to review the application for our land. And they found themselves having to regrettably vote for the overall plan, because it was a plan for the 13,000. It wasn't a vote and an appropriate consultation just for our parcel of land. And that's the point at which we took the council to court, and unfortunately we lost. So I don't feel that this is why I'm going on about this point, and there's so many interested parties. This is the first time we're having an opportunity to discuss the merits, at which point we found ourselves essentially already on the back foot. Doesn't feel right.
Sprawl, do you want to come back and just fill me in with the sort of chronology of this and just when this is included,
Yes.
what was available for consultation, etc.
Yes, thank you. So the chain of events were that sorry, Ms. Evans, would you mind just switching your microphone off? The chain of events were that the council post Regulation 18 consultation on the draft local plan, in considering all of the representations and undertaking, sorry, I'll start again. The site wasn't included as an allocation in the draft local plan at Regulation 18 stage. Having post Regulation 18, having regard to the additional evidence which the council commissioned, having regard to the consultation responses received, as we've discussed in other hearing statements, some sites were no longer considered appropriate to include in the pre-submission local plan. Other sites, and this is one of them, were considered following that further assessment of evidence and review of the consultations, was considered appropriate to include as an allocation. In the very beginning of 2021, the local plan in its entirety entered the council's committee process. That included 3 stages: a cabinet advisory board in very early January, second week of January from memory, followed by a meeting of the cabinet, followed by a meeting of full council. And the decision of the council was to, the matter that the council considered, and those boards in the cabinet beforehand, were to undertake Regulation 19 consultation, and subject to the outcomes of that, to then submit the local plan in due course. All of the evidence-based documents which were available to the members of the council through a shared cloud, essentially, from January, beginning of January onwards, throughout that committee process, they were available to councillors if they chose to access those to review them. This site was included within the plan throughout that committee process. In February, the full council, considering all of the sites, including this site, resolved to undertake Regulation 19 consultation, and subject to the outcomes of that, to submit the local plan. A local resident who I see around the virtual table today, I see his name, sought judicial review of that decision around on the grounds that the evidence base was not on the council's website ahead of the full council decision. Mrs. Justice Lang considered that application and deemed that it shouldn't be taken forwards. Essentially dismissed the application for JR before it's a substantive hearing. So the council then proceeded to undertake Regulation 19 consultation, and local residents had the opportunity to provide comments, obviously based around soundness, etc., on the inclusion of this site. All of the evidence base was available on the council's website throughout the period of Regulation 19 consultation, and the plan, and indeed, so you will have seen those representations, and the plan was then submitted. So that is the chronology in relation to this site.
So just the February meeting that's been referred to then, so that was a council meeting where the council resolved to go out to Reg 19 consultation. This site was then included within that plan and consulted upon. And
Sorry, yes, sir. So this site was included in that plan, that the plan that they considered. So that was a full council decision to go to Regulation 19 consultation on a plan that included this site. So in terms the references about it being included at the last minute, it was included in the regulation. It was included in the pre-submission version of the local plan that was considered by full council and those preceding committees at the council prior to the full council, you know, that feed into that full council decision.
Can I just that's point around accessibility for all of the councillors at that February the 3rd meeting. From everything that we've been told, and I understand there's some councillors here themselves that are affected by it, your point that actually, I guess maybe you're suggesting it was the individual councillors' issues that meant they were unable to access the documents. Surely it's incumbent upon the fair and democratic process to ensure that everybody has actually seen those documents before they're at a meeting at which they're expected to vote, particularly when we're talking about development on what is greenbelt land and should be protected. And actually, I've got a quote here from Councillor Hayward, actually from that meeting. There are a number of quotes that we've made in our representations before, but just to remind you, and I quote, as at around 4 p.m. today, at least 12 members of this council had not accessed the server, which means that many members expected to vote have not accessed these documents, let alone read and understood them. End of quote. So I can't agree with you. And so that's why we fundamentally believe that this site shouldn't have been included in the way it was. It feels like it was snuck in at the last minute via the back door.
Well, we put that to one side for now. Why do you consider then that in the principle of this site? So before we get into any of the sort of the detail, then why is it that you think the plan is unsound and unjustified by including this site in principle, so in terms of its location, etc.? Before we get into any of the detail, what's your position on that then, Mr. Rook? Sorry.
Well, I guess it currently and has always been protected by its greenbelt status, and that status has always been considered high. It's one of the reasons why the local residents moved into the area. Fundamentally, I guess that underpins, we're going to go into further details around accessibility and traffic issues and so on. But fundamentally, this is one of the remaining protected areas under Greenbelt, and sort of one of the founding principles is to guard against urban sprawl. If this parcel of land is built upon, that is the very definition of urban sprawl. It continues to join the boroughs of Tunbridge Wells and Southborough. No matter whether you say it's the entire land that was originally proposed and rejected, or now we're essentially just cutting a corner off and saying, we'll just have that little area and we'll make 100 or so homes. It is against the principle of Greenbelt, and it's only being considered now because simultaneously as this planning permission was granted, the Greenbelt status was downgraded. So we don't believe it's an appropriate location for development. And there's a number of other reasons that we would probably get into as this conversation moves forward today.
Okay, thank you. Let's see what some other people have got to say. We'll go to Mr. Buckwell, please.
Hello, sir. Jonathan Buckwell, DHA Planning, on behalf of Canewood Estates, who control the larger part of the parcel that we are discussing now. If I can just start going back to the question that you asked originally about why the additional land is included in the allocation, just to say from our point of view, we completely support that. I think another reason for including it as well as being able to control the open space and manage the open space associated with the allocation is that there is a public footpath that runs along the south side of the allocation as well. And clearly from a pedestrian accessibility point of view, it's going to be important to be able to control accesses into that to create good pedestrian permeability and also potentially create additional routes through there as well. So I think that is another reason why it is important to include it within the allocation. Just to go back to very briefly on the point that Mr. Rook has just been raising, I'm not going to get into this in detail, but I just do note that he is suggesting that this is the first opportunity that he's had to comment on this allocation, which just is clearly not true, because the site was consulted on in detail at Regulation 19 when the policy was available to view in full. And indeed, if you look at core document 3.125 AIV, page 344, you will see a very detailed objection from Mr. Rook on behalf of the action group that he is representing today. So it's quite clear that he did have the opportunity to object earlier on in the process, and he took that opportunity. Finally, just for now at least, just in terms of the suggestions being made about urban sprawl here, we are talking about a relatively small additional area that's being proposed for development on the edge of Tunbridge Wells here. That's not what I would call urban sprawl. Urban sprawl is uncontrolled building, and I would suggest that in all directions. What we've got here is one of the very few parcels of land that is adjacent to Tunbridge Wells that is not in the area of outstanding natural beauty. You'll be well aware, sir, from all of the discussions to date that Tunbridge Wells as a borough is significantly constrained by Greenbelt and AONB, and that means that choices have to be made and compromises have to be made. And it is quite right that the council has looked at, first of all, at the areas which are less constrained than others, and this site is certainly one of those. Clearly, Greenbelt is a constraint, and that has to be taken into account fully, but it is not in the area of outstanding natural beauty. And unlike the other few parcels of non-AONB land immediately adjacent to Tunbridge Wells at the moment, it is very well related to existing development. So it is an extremely logical and natural extension to Tunbridge Wells. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go to Margaret Borland next, please.
Right. The light in this room is not working well for this. However, this is Margaret Borland speaking on behalf of CPRE Kent. And I'd like to pick up on the last point made about the location of this site and its sustainability. In yesterday's session on development management policies for housing, my colleague Julie Davis highlighted CPRE's concerns that development management policy H2 on housing density was neither effective nor compliant with the NPPF in relation to minimum housing densities. We've set out in our representations elsewhere that we're also very concerned at the low densities for site allocations. That's particularly on brownfield land, but it's also in urban areas like this, and it's going to result in the unnecessary loss of greenfield land here, including greenfield land in the Greenbelt. I'm not going to go into Greenbelt exceptions or anything at this point because it's not the right point in this discussion. But this site is adjacent to the main urban area of Royal Tunbridge Wells and Southborough. And the Southborough bit is very, very important. I would say it's a 10-minute stroll, not even a 10-minute walk from the town centre of Southborough. It is hugely sustainable. There are bus services, there are shops, there's a community hub. Actually, the majority of sites within the discussions today are going to be within walking distance of existing town centre facilities, either at Royal Tunbridge Wells and Southborough. Our expectation for any site that's developed like that has always been that the starting point for these allocations would be to target urban intensity developments, densities in line with the National Model Design Code, 60 to 120 dph, or higher for those very close to town centres. But it's shown in the council's paper, TWLP 083, that isn't the case either here or in the wider area. The density for this site is put at 23, the expectation. We don't believe that the site should be built on at all, but if it's going to be built on, surely it has to be optimised for development. Surely it should be a much smaller built site because it is so sustainable. It is so close to development. It may take just over half an hour to walk into Royal Tunbridge Wells town centre, but it is no distance at all from Southborough town centre. Now today I'm sharing my virtual seat with Mark Booker from the Tunbridge Wells Town Forum, and so he would also like to speak at this point, if that's all right, sir.
Yep, that's fine.
Thank you, sir. Really, just to support what has just been said, we'll be returning to whether an allocation should be made at all in relation to Greenbelt issues. But we as a town forum would see two possibilities should you be minded to remove the site from the Greenbelt, which we oppose, like the two previous speakers. We would say either the density should be greatly increased, and which would enable the amount of land taken from the Greenbelt to be correspondingly reduced. So that would be the alternative we would look at. We totally support what CPRE are saying about the need for an urban density, and in fact an urban density beyond what was talked about yesterday, should this site be allocated, so that one would preserve more of the Greenbelt by increasing the proposed density. That would be our proposal, sir.
Obviously, this is related then to the site area, but the 23 dwelling per hectare figure then, that's based on the net site area excluding the woodland area, I presume. Yeah. So why is that only 23 dwellings per hectare? Why is it not greater? So we talked a lot about this yesterday, maximising densities, accessible locations, etc. What's driven the site capacity there?
I think it's a number of factors, and reaching a balance really on a site like this. It's obviously, as the CPRE said, it is close to the settlement of Southborough, but it is a Greenbelt release site, and we've considered that it is appropriate, but still, we need to take account of the sensitivities that there are, and it's considered that lower density for that site would be appropriate. The policy wording at AL-RTW5 refers to approximately 100 residential dwellings, as all of the policies do for the sites, and so subject to detailed design that could come forward at a later stage. We'd have to consider that, but as a starting point, we feel that the density is appropriate here.
If I could just add, sir, the site is, it does slope in two directions. There's a a fall from the north eastern part of the site to the south, well, I suppose more westerly part of the site of approximately 10 metres. There, whilst we feel it is well enclosed visually, there are additionally there is that particular topography, and there are also other elements of trees and features within the site as well, which has led to that overall conclusion. But I would emphasise again, Mrs. Evans said there, around approximately.
Okay, let's see some other hands up. Mr. Buckwell, you've got your hand up. I'm not sure if it's the same point or a different one.
No, just very briefly, another point on that. I mean, Ms. Bullen's correct. This is an extremely sustainable site. It's very close to the town centre. It's also pretty much adjacent to 2 secondary schools, very close to a primary school, and churches and other facilities, including the main bus corridor for the Tunbridge Wells urban area too, as well as being within walking distance of a railway station. So it is a highly sustainable site. I completely agree with her that we need to make the most of that. We don't object to the density that has been set out in the local plan. It will always come down to detailed design, but what I would say is through that detailed design process, if there are opportunities to increase the density, I think it's important that the policy doesn't prevent that, because for all the reasons that Ms. Bullen has mentioned, it is important to make the best use of well-located sustainable sites like this. And that is certainly the sensible solution, rather than reducing the site area here. You know, the site area has been chosen really, as Ms. Evans has said, on landscape grounds. It makes sense to use this area as a whole, but it's important to use that to its best effect. Thank you.
I'll go to Mr. Dunn next, please.
Good morning, Mr. Berger. Michael Dunn from the Sandhurst Society. The Sandhurst Society is a smaller version of the Tunbridge Wells Civic Society, and its main aims are looking after the civic heritage and amenity in Southborough and High Brooms. I'm particularly concerned with this site about heritage and amenity. I know that it's just over the border in Tunbridge Wells, but it is used by residents in Southborough for amenity purposes. It forms part of a complete green belt round the western side of Southborough, going from there right round to the cricket ground in the north. If this were allowed, there would be, they have already said, okay, we'll reduce the site area which we originally wanted, but in future there's no guarantee that a future developer might want to extend further along Spelthurst Road with consequent problems, eradication of the green belt. Also, the suggestion of increased density, we're going to obviously come on to traffic problems, and that would only add to the traffic problems. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Tom Ierson. Is that your surname?
Yes, that is my surname. Good morning, sir. I'm Tom Ierson, also part of the Spelthurst Road Community Action Group, representing local residents. I'd just like to respond to this point made by the legal representation of Canewood, that this site is a natural place to develop land because it is not in AOB land, and that it's adjacent to Tunbridge Wells to Southborough. But it also begins to close the last remaining area of countryside connecting Southborough and Tunbridge Wells. That doesn't mean it's a natural and inevitable place to build. In fact, we believe the opposite applies, and this should be kept as greenbelt land. And that last remaining land separating Tunbridge Wells and Southborough will be kept as it is. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Bourne, anything from the council? Do you want to come back on, or Ms. Evans, that you've heard thus far?
No, thank you, sir.
Okay. Do you want to move on? It's just quite a lot to get through, and I want to start looking at some of the detail in this. So we will move on. What I want to understand is, so we've looked at site area, scale of development, and we talked a lot yesterday about density as well, and this is that sort of reoccurring theme, which no doubt will probably continue. But the gentleman who spoke last did touch upon access, and I've asked some questions about this and seen some representations around this. So how will this site be accessed, and is it sufficiently clear how it will take vehicular access, where from, and how is that being considered as part of the allocation process?
Okay, if I can respond to that. I'd refer you to question 29, the council's response in our statement on page 53, where you've got a number of questions in terms of access and highways, and then the highways and trees. Essentially, the policy as it's worded at criteria 1 states that new vehicular access to be provided from Spelthurst Road with the exact location to be determined by detailed transport assessment work. And we have had early discussions with Kent County Council Highways on this matter, and they do feel that an access solution can be arrived at accessing the site from Spelthurst Road. The exact location will be subject to further sort of detailed work, but it is considered that is appropriate. Recognising there are trees on the frontage of Spelthurst Road, and also the issue about the road widening as well, which is criteria 2 within the policy. And I think it's something that possibly we could make clearer in that policy at criteria 2, that it's only Kent County Council have sort of confirmed that it would only need to be localised road widening at the point of access to facilitate sort of refuse vehicle type movements. It wouldn't be whole scale widening all along that section of Spelthurst Road, which I think is what some of the representations were sort of thinking was the case. So I think there is something that we could clarify on that. And in terms of the I think that covers those points really, in terms of the situation we're currently at with the site. But it's the access can be provided from Spelthurst Road.
Yeah, so this is this one I've obviously had a look at sort of informally ahead of this hearing, as I have done with all the sites, really, just to have a sort of initial understanding, and then I'll go look at them in some more detail for the benefit of people's comments. But obviously, when I was down there was so parked cars, there's the belt of trees, there's a change in level, etc. So how is the council, or what has the council done to consider the sort of the feasibility of achieving an access down there, given those sort of constraints and issues that I've identified?
The council has considered that, and also there's been representations made from the agents on behalf of the site, looking at that in terms of a solution for access into the site, which the council's been party to, and that's also been shared with Kent County Council Highways as well.
And so if I could just elaborate in terms of the the approach that the council has taken to considering access. Similarly with, sorry, Ms Evans, would you mind switching your mic off?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. I'll just hear a slight echo. In line with the approach taken for other sites, consideration has been given through particularly through the Sheila, and then for those sites which were considered as potentially suitable, workshops have been held with Kent County Council, looking at individual sites and that was with those officers who are at the county council, who are experienced, they know the borough well. It involved reviewing the allocations or potential allocations. It involved looking at the particular circumstances of them, having regard to matters such as the form of the highway, its width, positions for potential accesses in relation to how the highway curves, the topography, and so those occurred over a number of days, including between Regulation 18 and Regulation 19 when this site was considered. And then, as Mrs Evans says, the site promoters separately have undertaken sort of further their further considerations as well. So yes, that's assessment of access for this site has followed the similar approaches to what's happened on all of the allocations.
And just in terms of the requirements of the actual plan, then, if you turn back to the local plan, what does the plan require? Let's have a quick look at the requirements. Does it doesn't specify an exact location for the access, does it?
No, criteria 1 says new vehicular access to be provided from Spelthurst Road with the exact location to be determined by detailed transport assessment work. And that was wording that's been agreed with Kent County Council, as Mr. Bourne says, in terms of how we deal with that.
The second, yes, the second point, there's possible widening of the section of Spelthurst Road that runs adjacent to the site and the provision of an appropriate level of parking for existing residents within the site itself. So a couple of issues there. Firstly, possible widening. Is that clear? Is it widening? Is that what's going to be needed?
Yeah, I think that's what I was referring to earlier, that it possibly we could look at clarify, some clarity in that criteria, that it does need widening, but it's only localized widening.
So is it that it's widening of Spelthurst Road to facilitate site access, presumably? Yeah. Rather than there's a whole widening. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think where you've got words like possible, I think that again it needs the wording tightening up there for effectiveness. Yeah. In terms of the second part about that, then, and the provision of an appropriate level of parking for existing residents within the sites, just talk to me about that. Then, what's that expecting from the developers? Is it justified? Is it appropriate? Where's that come from?
Yeah, I think that basically relates to the fact that there is existing that area of Spelthurst Road, as you said when you had a look at the site, there is parking there, which some of the existing residents of Spelthurst Road do use that, and we've included that within the policy there to deal with that issue, that obviously if some of that parking was removed as part of the proposals coming forward, that it would be possible to re-provide some parking within the site to counteract that loss on the street.
So what form would that take then? Obviously, at a minute, residents parking on streets. what would you be expecting this sort of replacements provision to look like? What sort of thing we're talking about?
I think it would have to be subject to the detailed design in terms of, but I think it would need to be similar parking, sorry, on the street within the new site layout. So I think it would be something we'd have to discuss at that detailed design stage. But by having the hook in the policy, it allows that to happen, which we'd need to discuss in further detail.
So we feel that there's probably a couple of options as to how that could be accommodated. It would be obviously have to be within the most northerly part of the site. Good, that which is closest to those properties on the northern side of Spelthurst Road, which do not have on-site parking at the moment. As Mrs. Evans says, there's potentially different ways that could be accommodated on site, but the requirement recognises the context which you saw and you described, and again feeds into part of the considerations around density, given that we feel there will be a need for that to be accommodated. But as I say, there are different forms as to how that could occur, but would be subject to detailed design, taking into account the other matters that we'd have to consider in terms of the overall layout at planning application stage.
Okay, let's take some views then now. So I'll take people as they appear on my screen in order. So we'll go with Paul Lulham first.
Yes, thank you, sir. Start my video. There we go. Yes, Paul Lulham, so representing Canewood Estates alongside my colleague Jonathan Buckwell. I'm Transport Planning Director at DHA. Just to really elaborate and support the council's position on this, Spelthurst Road is a suburban area. It's subject to a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. So it's an area where manual for streets design principles would apply, and that's really about prioritising low vehicle speeds and pedestrian and cycle movement as well. It's a bus route, a relatively frequent bus route. It caters for larger vehicle movements such as refuse freighters on a regular basis, and it does so safely, has a good highway safety record. So as you say, there is a degree of on-street parking related to the properties without their own provision on the northern side of Spelthurst Road. That is relatively common in a location such as this. It does have the benefit of acting as a traffic calming feature, maintaining speeds at or below 30 miles an hour in the main. And so it wouldn't necessarily be desirable in our view to remove it completely, but it could certainly be rationalised through appropriate restrictions and reprovision within the site to facilitate traffic flow and indeed improve sight lines along there. In terms of the form of the access, I think the extent of engineering could be kept to a minimum here. Again, we're following manual for streets principles which support that, and the sightline requirements from the access within this location, where speeds, as I say, are around or below 30, are relatively modest as well, which will facilitate retention of as much landscaping and trees as possible. So in my view, a simple priority junction would be sufficient in this case. So I note my colleagues at Phil Jones Associates who are here, and I think Mr. Franklin has his hands up and may wish to add something to this, but they have had engagement with Kent County Council Highways at a pre-application stage. And they have confirmed that further widening of Spelthurst Road beyond the access itself is not required. So as the council have confirmed, that can be retained to the immediate vicinity of the site access, just to facilitate turning by larger vehicles such as refuse vehicles. Clearly, sir, a small number of trees would inevitably have to be lost to make way for the access. That would clearly be informed by an arboricultural assessment to ensure that the highest value trees are retained. And finally, just on the retention of parking, as I've said, we support that and can facilitate that to an appropriate level. The form of that, of course, would be informed by further master planning work, but I suspect that would take the form of an unallocated provision on the sort of principal spine road entering the site. That's all I wanted to add, sir.
Okay, so again, just taking people in turn, then we'll go Margaret Borland next.
Thank you, sir. I'll get my video started, not that you can see me terribly well. Again, it's Margaret Borland speaking on behalf of CPRE. And firstly, I'd like to clarify the earlier point I was making about increased density on the site was very much to reduce the reduction in greenbelt land. I wasn't suggesting that the whole 4-point-something hectares of developable area should be built on at urban density. It was much more saying to hit 100 houses, you would need 1 hectare. But moving on to this topic, the road already suffers from severe congestion at the junction with London Road, with the A26. It's particularly bad approaching Reynolds Lane. There's traffic turning conflicts in both directions, which worsens that congestion. My experience has been trying to turn right out of the Majestic Wine Warehouse, which is right on the corner there, and sitting there looking at the traffic queue thinking, I can't turn right. I can't turn right. I can't turn right. I'm going to have to turn left and drive up and go around the back streets of Southborough. It's absolutely impossible most of the time. If we put any development further up Spelthurst Road, that's what anybody parked in that area is going to experience. The traffic queues will go back and people won't be able to turn right out of the development. And that's the most likely route out, I would have thought. The route also leads up to Salomons, which has events. How's that going to affect the residents trying to get out of the site? It's going to be very, very dangerous. And I think it is one of the things that is really worrying about this, that it's all very well thinking about traffic queues in isolation, but if you actually look at how it works in practice, it's real people trying to drive these cars, and it's just not going to be possible for it to work. Thank you. And Mark Booker also wishes to speak for the Town Forum.
Thank you, sir. In fact, on this point, I wish to address you on behalf of the Cultural Association, which has previously submitted responses to the consultations and also a hearing statement on this matter. Our interest is in Reynolds Lane, which leads to the area in which our residents live, which is Culverden Park Road and Culverden Down, and some of our residents live on Reynolds Lane itself. So the proposals here directly affect those residents. Reynolds Lane is a rural lane with a resolutely rural feel on all of its central section. It's a very ancient routeway and sits within a pleasant area of countryside. Although the issue of Reynolds Lane is dealt with in the proposed allocation, there is nothing in the response of the Borough Council to your question, sir, which deals with this issue. The proposed proposals within the proposed allocation are extremely vague concerning Reynolds Lane, in the sense that there will be some consideration given to resolving the problems which already exist. It's used as a rat run to avoid the problems that Margaret Borland has been referring to, sir. in Southborough, we already suffer a very substantial peak hour traffic congestion within our area caused by this rat run. Our feeling is that should any allocation be made at the top of Reynolds Lane in relation to this allocation, or any smaller or larger allocation, the issue of Reynolds Lane absolutely has to be resolved, and that the only satisfactory way would be to sever this lane at a point along its length, so that there would no longer physically be a rat run, because with any increase in traffic in the Southborough area, the problems which we already face will be magnified. So that's therefore a point on behalf of a very limited but interested party, the Culvedon Residents Association. Thank you, sir.
Okay, I'll go to Peter Haveneros. Apologies if I've pronounced your surname incorrectly.
Garinos. Yes, I've got a couple of points. One,
I can't see you, Peter.
have I start my video? It says I can't start my video because the host has stopped it.
Okay, 1 second. Charlotte, are you there? Are you able to try get the video working? If not, I can hear you really well. So if not, it's not an issue, but we'll ask Charlotte, see if we can get that working.
No.
No. Anyway,
okay, well, we can hear you loud and clear. So
okay. Two things on the access. One is we've had two separate issues. One is the density of housing, and the other is the site access. But I don't see how the two can be separated, because the access required for 100 odd houses will be very different to the access required for 250 houses, because of people queuing, waiting to turn, trying to get in and out, and moving across the road. And it seems to be assumed that everything's been done and it's been looked at for 100 houses, and they've got solutions. If the number of the density of houses increases, then if the site area is reduced accordingly, then that doesn't affect the access. But if the density increases over the proposed full site area for development, then there will be a very considerable increase in the requirements for the entrance. And that doesn't seem to be addressed at all. And the other thing is, for the question of say, allowing parking on site for people who are displaced from Spelthurst Road. Well, I mean, how do you separate that parking from the residents using it? I mean, it seems to me highly likely that any parking provided, especially if it's the houses are at a higher density, will be taken by the residents and their visitors. So it's not a thing which to say, oh well, we've got a solution for that, because I don't believe they have got a solution for that. And then on the last point, which was raised by a colleague of ours in many ways, but we as residents of Reynolds Lane would find a closure of Reynolds Lane a tremendous barrier to our lives, because we would be forced to come out onto Spelthurst Road to get down to a place which we can get to in 2 minutes at the moment. And so that's a big consideration, and should be addressed before any changes are made to the current traffic situation. I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, thank you. Go to Mr. Franklin next, please.
Good morning. Can you hear me? My name is Matthew Franklin. I'm a Transport Planning Director at Phil Jones Associates, PJA. I'm speaking on behalf of Dandara, who are the promoters of one of the parcels of the site of this site. So just to cover on the points of access, as I think has been mentioned before, we as a promotion have looked at this in quite a bit of detail already. We have prepared an access design which has gone to KCC and has been discussed with KCC, and that's been positioned quite carefully along the site frontage of the land that Dandara are promoting, and that positioning has taken into account all the issues that we've talked about topography, the existing parking along the frontage, the positioning of the opposing junctions, and also trees. So it has been informed by a detailed arboricultural assessment, which has highlighted, I think it's 6 trees that would need to be removed, of which half of which are well, there's various different levels of quality, but these are the lower quality trees along the site frontage in the area where the access is proposed. So it's a relatively minimal impact upon the trees on the site frontage. I think it's, as has been discussed, we've had conversations with KCC about the widening. Their concern is literally in relation to the immediate vicinity of the access point. And they wouldn't be supporting a change of the nature of Spelthurst Road all the way along. So it is just a matter of turning larger vehicles in and out of the site, which has been accommodated for in our access design. In terms of the impact on parking, the access location has taken this into account. So there is extensive parking along some of the site frontage, but where we've sort of demonstrated an access position towards the western side of the site, where parking occurs on the northern side of Spelthurst Lane. So I think where we've shown the access arrangement, it would result in the removal of approximately 4 parking, or the space for 4 parking, or 4 cars being parked on Spelthurst Lane. And the discussion we've had with KCC and what we're envisaging is that those spaces are then re-provided immediately within the site as part of the access road, potentially within a lay-by, potentially or just on the carriageway itself, but that's something for further design. I think the key point to note that those spaces will be provided over and above any parking requirement for the site based on the parking standards. So parking will be provided on site for the residents, for visitors, and then beyond that, any re-provision of parking will be added on top. So it wouldn't be true to say that the demand for those spaces would be taken up by residents and visitors. I think just to cover a couple of the other points that have just been raised about some traffic impact and Reynolds Lane, I think obviously a full transport assessment will be undertaken at the planning application stage. We've heard that this is a sustainable site. It's close to key public transport. It's close to the key walking cycling corridors that have been identified in the local cycling walking infrastructure plan. So I think that there are encouraging sort of signs for a good level of modal shift from this site and sustainable travels, which will help to reduce any traffic impact. And then in relation quickly to Reynolds Lane, we did have a pre-app meeting with KCC to discuss these proposals last year, which I think has been referred to in our representations. The issue of Reynolds Lane was discussed at that point. KCC were, I think, they were exploring options for how they want to deal with Reynolds Lane, although it has previously been proposed to close it to general traffic as part of cycle improvements, and their trial was done of that during the COVID pandemic. And I think one of the points that they mentioned in the meeting was that they would want to discuss further with applicants on this site about anything we can do to support changes to Reynolds Lane that would help discourage rat running down there. So I think that's certainly something that would be subject to further discussion with KCC as their aspirations for the road sort of come forward in the future.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rook.
Hello again. So I just, I'd like to make a point again around the traffic issues, right? It seems unbelievable to me that we're talking about a development currently with a sort of 20 to 30 DPH, 100 homes that is going to maybe add 150 cars to the site. And we're not, we're kidding ourselves that that's not going to add a significant problem to an area that is already heavily congested. So I know that one of our members, and I promised him that I would raise this today, he lives just beyond to the west side of Kibbles Lane. So fully circa 500 metres from the junction there between Spelthurst and the A26. He regularly cannot get out of his driveway at the school run times and commuting times and is able to turn right. Because of the congestion that already exists. We're talking about adding, at this stage, but you know, let's say 100 homes. That's going to make that problem hugely worse. I think in my representation, I also made the point about the land where currently there's 12 houses being developed that for a long time was refused by the Highways Agency because of the problems that it would add to the pre-existing traffic problems. I myself live at the northern end of Reynolds Lane and can attest to the fact that regularly I witness people often nearly coming to blows and certainly having quite voluble disputes with one another because they get stuck outside of the northern end of Reynolds Lane because everyone is turning up to drop off their kids at the school at St Greg's. Now there are measures being taken there around yellow lines being introduced shortly and so on, but it's a volume issue, right? You can't get away from it. There's too many people, and this Spelthurst Road in the A26 doesn't allow the flow of traffic suitably for the volume. Anything that increases to the volume is going to further exacerbate what is a really difficult issue already in the area. And then just finally, just a couple of points I wanted to respond to that Matt Franklin, representing Dandara, just made. I'm sure we're going to come on to this later, but he talked about the fantastic cycle lane network that we have around here and the excellent public transport services. I did make this in my representations, but I can't just let that go as a given that we've got this great cycle lane. We don't, as you'll have seen in the representations I made. The A26 is an extremely busy road. They tried a cycle lane during the pandemic with a number of bollards that were set up, and it was an abject failure. The bollards were knocked down. It was unsafe. The road just isn't wide enough. There's too much traffic. And in fact, only last summer, the council had to give back £680,000 to KCC because they were unable, and the KCC agreed that this road was unsuitable for a cycle lane. I'm aware there's an LC WIP study that's just been done, which is trying to propose something similar again, but to rely on that as a solution to the traffic issues and saying everyone's going to start getting on a bike it's just not true. It's not going to happen. And the other thing around public transport, we've seen people talk about access to High Brooms. High Brooms is a good 30-minute walk away. It's not on your doorstep. There isn't a bus service that goes all the way down Yew Tree Road to get access to that. And indeed, my children locally go to schools here and they try and get on the bus on the A26. And again, in the school rush hours, they often have to miss 2 or 3 buses before they're able to get successfully onto a bus. It isn't that well served. Yes, they exist, but do we have enough of them, and do they suitably serve the number of residents locally currently? Absolutely not. So that's why I don't believe that this site is actually a sustainable one at all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ison?
Hello again. I'd like to talk about the impact on the trees and the essential characteristics of the site. It seems to me the council have accepted that the widening of the Spelthurst Road is an essential component of any development. The regard has to be made to the existing hedgerows and mature trees, including the mature oaks and Scott pine trees, which are many generations old, and they accept that they are essential to the characteristic of the site in the area. They also accept that there will inevitably be some loss of trees to create access to the site and widen the road. However, this would be, in their words, fairly minimal, the road widening localised, as we've heard, and no significant loss of trees would be required. This was also repeated by Dandara representatives. However, yes, I just want to reiterate that this is not based on any detailed development plan or robust analysis of the site. It really is pure conjecture, as it would need to be based on a future survey and plan, because the exact shape of the development and the access hasn't been finalised. So Tunbridge Wells Borough Council and Dandara cannot unequivocally guarantee that the impact on trees would be minimal. I'd just like to reiterate the trees are essential to the characteristic of the area. As the council admit, they also provide a screen from the houses for the houses on the north side of the road from the busy Spelthurst Road, and they are essential to the biodiversity of the immediate area, as well as the unique rural aspect of this site. We contend that the widening of the road may be far more than localised when the exact place of access has been finalised, and that the development of the fields for housing, the widening of the road and the protection of the tree line cannot all be achieved together. It's wishful thinking not founded on any thorough plan or analysis. Something may have to give, and it would inevitably be the trees, and with it much of the characteristic of the site and of the surrounding area. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dunn, please.
Hello again. On the subject of trees, nobody seems to have mentioned the fact that there is a tree preservation along the entire length of the northern boundary of that site on Spelthurst Road. Surely the value of a tree preservation order is that trees are preserved instead of demolition in part or in whole. Secondly, on the subject of providing parking for residents on this new site, you've seen that road, it's busy. It's very insensitive to suggest that residents are going to have to struggle across the road to park their cars. I think that's really not on. Thank you.
And finally, Mr. Lulham.
Yes, thank you, sir. I'll keep this relatively brief, but I wanted to come back on some of the points you've recently heard there about the sort of sustainability, accessibility credentials of the site. I think it's important to make the point. Obviously, paragraph 105 of the framework states that significant development should be focused on locations which are or can be made sustainable through limiting the need to travel and offering a genuine choice of transport modes. This can help to reduce congestion and emissions, improve air quality. I think it's probably fair to say, for the scale of development, this is one of the most accessible and sustainable locations in the borough in transport terms in this local plan. We are immediately adjacent to major secondary schools. The bus corridor on the A26 is probably one of the most frequent in West Kent in terms of access to bus services every 10 minutes or so during peak periods into the heart of Tunbridge Wells, and indeed the other way towards Tunbridge, where onward access to jobs and services and facilities are readily available. I make the walk to Highbroom Station 20 minutes based on route planning software that I've just consulted again. Highbroom Station offers frequent access onwards towards London and other Kent destinations. So, yeah, I think it's really important to note that for this scale of development, this is a highly accessible location. and not to develop in locations like this would lead to more car-dependent locations being needed for housing. So I think that's important for you to note, sir. There is an existing cycle route all the way down the A26 from Southborough into Tunbridge Wells. Much of that is a mandatory route. I can't be parked within or encroached by vehicles. There are certainly proposals within the council's local cycling and walking infrastructure plan to enhance that route further, but it is already well used and is an important asset which residents of this site could take advantage of. I think I'll leave it at that, sir.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Any other comments? Then we'll go to Mr. Kindred, who's not spoken, but again, we don't need to repeat comments that others have made. Mr. Kindred, anything additional you want to add?
Morning, sir. So Adam Kindred, CBRE, on behalf of Dan Dara. I just wanted to quickly point you in the direction of the matter statement that we submitted, which very much endorses the point that I think Miss Evans was alluding to in terms of a suggested rewording on point 2. I think it's probably evident from the nature of the way that this discussion has played out that the wording around there at the moment is creating a little bit of uncertainty in the local community. From the pre-application discussions that we've had with KCC, there is the confidence that that can be much more localised, hence why us as promoters of the site have been confident to put that through. They're suggesting that you should pursue that as a main modification to this policy. Just want to make that point just to sort of bring it full circle.
Did the council want to come back on anything that we've had? I know the site promoters have spoken, and there's been some good debate around sort of pros and cons on either side, but did the council as their plan want to add anything at this stage?
Yes, very briefly to draw attention to the transport evidence-based work that supports the local plan. So both that's in terms of the strategic modelling. Additionally, the core document CD 3.115A, which is the local cycling walking infrastructure plan and low traffic neighbourhoods. You'll note the requirements in the policy around particularly at 4 and 5 in relation to low traffic neighbourhoods, the links to the cycling network on the A26, and particularly the requirement for significant, and to contribute to a significant and comprehensive upgrade to the A26 cycle network. Mr. Lulham referred to the existing cycle route. There is in the local cycling, walking and infrastructure plan, there is a fully costed, segregated route along the A26 from the north of Southborough all the way to the town centre, indicated in that. Finally, sir, to draw attention again to the links to STR6, the strategic policy for transport, and the signed statement of common ground with Kent County Council on transport and highway matters, and I won't go into the details on the access, road widening, and car parking points, because I think Mrs. Evans and others have covered that sufficiently. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just by way of clarification for the council, just for my notes, tree preservation order along the front then, are those trees subject to a TPO? Is it individual trees? Is it a group TPO along the whole frontage?
The site layout plan shows the extent of the tree preservation order along Spelthurst Road. I'll have to double check the details if that's okay, and come back to you. Might just need to double check that.
Yeah, if you could clarify just through the programme officer by just sending the programme officer a copy of the TPO as it's laid out for the frontage of that site. When we've met on other sessions, we've talked about greenbelt release and principle of housing, and we've talked a lot about the need for housing. We've talked a lot about the spatial strategy, and we've talked a lot about the sort of strategic high level circumstances that the council believe there are to release land from its greenbelt in and around the borough. So at a site specific level then, and again this builds upon similar consultations we've had at Tudley Village and Paddock Wood. So at a site specific level then, what factors have the council taken into account, and what in summary would the council say are the circumstances which justify amending the greenbelt boundary in this location then?
Okay, I'd refer you to our statement again, page 58 and 59 in response to your question 31. And I think, you know, in essence, we've set out the approach that the council's gone through in considering exceptional circumstances for greenbelt release, and that's set out quite clearly in the development strategy topic paper for pre-submission local plan, and in their table 5. It's got the summary of proposed site allocation policies in the local plan that contain land currently within the green belt. And there's information set out within there. And I think that there's a number of factors that have been referred to today that have led to that consideration. The sustainable location of the site, and I think many people have referred to that on the edge of the urban area of Tunbridge Wells and Southborough. It being a well-located site to meet developments. There's also the site's ability to contribute and provide links to the local pedestrian and cycle network, as Mr. Bourne has just referred to in terms of the A26 cycle route upgrades, and that's sort of referred to in the statement that we've submitted as well. And there's also the opportunity for the new greenbelt boundary to be provided in this location. There's the woodland, as we've discussed, the sort of area to the south of the site to provide, you know, buffer and open space, landscape buffer, and to redraw the greenbelt boundary in that location.
So it's fair to say then, from the council's point of view, then that it's a combination of factors from the sort of high level meeting housing needs in sustainable locations that we've already talked about on previous days, and then is sort of combined with this sort of localized factors that the council believe that this is an accessible site and is in a location where the greenbelt boundary can be redrawn on sort of long-term defensible boundaries, i.e. the tree belt to the south.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take some views on this then, because I know that others have sort of got a differing view on whether or not the exceptional circumstances exist here. So based on what we've heard, go to Mr. Avon-Renos first.
Come on.
Okay, I'm not getting my video again, but on the question of the cycle network and how this, one of the merits of this site is it makes a contribution to the local cycle network, and this site is proposed to be substantially affordable housing. I find it's hard to see how the affordable housing money should be taken from people buying affordable housing to finance a cycle network, which is almost certainly a white elephant, but is certainly not for their benefit. And so I mean the argument that the contribution from this site is
is good for the people, I think is wrong. It's actually detrimental to the people who need to be housed near to a place like Southborough. So I think the contribution aspect of this should be disregarded. The people who will walk to Southborough, do their things, take the buses, are not the people who should be paying big, as part of the house that they're trying to get. Should be affected by it making a contribution to the council. That funding should come from somewhere else.
And it doesn't exist.
And on the question of the site being the new landscape greenbelt boundary being a good thing coming out of the site, it's certainly not a good thing. The site at the moment is years. It's well protected. It's been kept off development for ever since the greenbelt was initiated. It's got a most magnificent view. I mean, they say in the Greenbelt Study 3, the effect on the remaining greenbelt will be negligible. Well, that's debatable, but the fact is that the greenbelt they're removing is a treasure, a jewel. It's got the most wonderful view to have within this urban setting, and they're proposing, and they're ignoring that as an effect on the greenbelt. The effect on the greenbelt is not at all negligible. It's high, and the new boundary, which is totally ill-defined as to what's going to be built. Some people talk about open space, other people talk about the trees and so on. But whether that'll form a good boundary or not is in question. But the fact is that it can simply be reproduced further down the hill if that's what the developer pushes for. And the loss of this area to the greenbelt will be substantial. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Borland.
Thank you, sir. So hopefully you can see us a bit better this time. So the first thing is that I seem to hear someone say earlier on in this discussion that it's being built on a greenfield site. So a greenbelt site, exceptional circumstances, it's going to provide a load of affordable housing. So why aren't we just offering to build on all the greenfield sites? Because that will provide more affordable housing than building on brownfield sites. We seem to have got the strategy a bit confused here. I think the whole discussion about sustainability is also very confused in terms of, particularly in terms of the cycle routes. I'd be very, very interested to see the evidence of the modal change that the cycle route beside the A21 between Tunbridge Wells and Tunbridge has created, and the one between Southborough and Tunbridge Wells, because certainly I travelled in the other week to the hearings on a bus, and in that time I saw 2 cyclists, and also I saw them because they had to pull out round the bus at the bus stop into the flow of traffic because the cycle route didn't avoid the bus stop. The part of Southborough that they're talking about for a cycle route is narrower than those roads. It's, if a bus stops in the road, there is no way you can pull out round it without hitting the cars coming towards you. So it's not going to be the solution to everything. Of course, if the council believe it is, then perhaps they should develop this site without any parking at all, or with very, very minimal parking, so that people bought it knowing that they were going to be expected to walk or cycle or get the bus. And that would actually solve the transport problems on Spelthurst Road as well. I'm not suggesting that it's a sensible thing to do, but because I think it would actually just create more parking because people would still have their cars and go and park elsewhere. But it is one of those things that we seem to be, our strategy seems to be saying one thing, but practicalities seem to be saying the other the whole time. And I'm not sure that any of this actually contributes to exceptional circumstances for releasing greenbelt land. This land is very, very valuable to the residents of Southborough, particularly. It's that footpath is wonderful to walk through from Spelthurst Road to Reynolds Lane. It won't be quite as wonderful when it's beside a housing estate with all the paraphernalia, the noise, the dogs barking, whatever. That's one of the reasons this area is very, very good for the greenbelt. It is a proper greenbelt piece there for the people who live in an urban area. You can't take that away. And that's all I want to say. And again, Mr. Booker would also like to contribute to this.
Thank you, sir. If I can expand on that, please. This piece of land satisfies all 5 purposes for which the greenbelt is established, because as well as the ordinary ones, it actually prevents the coalescence of Southborough with Tunbridge Wells. So it's a piece of greenbelt land which is particularly valuable and should be treated as such. And we've already heard that under the Regulation 18, there were found no exceptional circumstances justifying building there, because the site was not retained under Regulation 18, although it had been submitted for development. So that was the position under Regulation 18. We've then heard about the circumstances which led for this site to be added at the last minute to the draft local plan. And I think we can probably tie this in to a matter we're going to hear this afternoon concerning Spratsbrook Farm, because at Spratsbrook Farm, following government directives about paying even more attention to the AONB, the allocation at Spratsbrook Farm was reduced. And this probably explains why an equivalent number of houses were suddenly proposed on a site where no exceptional circumstances had been found. And so we're looking here, sir, at a snapshot which was taken in 2020 because of a change of circumstances, and which we need not go into in any more detail at this point. What I would invite you to do today, sir, is to take a snapshot today, because we're talking about snapshots, and the local plan should be based on the closest snapshot available. If you look at the NPPF paragraph 141, it requires a local authority to examine fully all other reasonable options for meeting its identified need for development. Now, when you look at the 2020 snapshot, it may be argued that there were exceptional circumstances. But what is the situation today? We have a proposed development at the cinema site in the centre of Tunbridge Wells, which was previously allocated for, or potentially allocated for 104 dwellings. The present proposed applicants are looking at 165 dwellings. So we've already got 60 odd dwellings which were not in any way foreseen at this time of the snapshot of 2020. You've also, even more recently, had the former headquarters of the Freight Transport Association on St. John's Road, another extremely sustainable location, which is being proposed for some 43 dwellings. So taking those two alone, you've already got a snapshot which is showing you a potential supply which exceeds that which has been proposed now at Canewood Farm. And that's without looking at the opportunities which will occur in connection with the shopping mall at Royal Victoria Place, which is becoming an underutilised site, which belongs to British Land, who are pretty smart operators, and who will probably, within the 5-year timescale, be looking at how they might make better use of that by redeveloping part of it, including residential development. So what I would suggest, sir, is that if you take a snapshot today, looking at this proposal, we should not be looking backwards. We should be looking to the present and the future and seeing that the exceptional circumstances which were not found to apply under Regulation 18, again, no longer apply. And therefore, we would invite you to reject this site. Should, however, on having heard all of the evidence today, you consider that you still feel that the site is suitable for allocation, we would suggest that perhaps it should be safeguarded for the future, for a later period, as an alternative to an allocation now. So that is broadly our view on exceptional circumstances, sir.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rook.
Hi, yes, hello again. So I would like to draw our attention particularly to paragraph 141 and around the issues there of making sure that we've exhausted all the brownfield sites, and then the secondary point around housing density. So I think that there's no disagreement over the principle that if you're going to release greenbelt land in this borough, anywhere within the United Kingdom, exceptional circumstances have to exist. Otherwise, you've lost this land forever. Once it's gone, there's no getting it back. And that's, I guess, the very founding principle of the greenbelt policy in the first place. So it seems to me, having listened to some of the other hearings that have been taking place recently, that there are significant questions that have been legitimately raised about whether the council has actually exhausted all of the potential brownfield sites as a first part of the process. I believe I was watching one of the hearings from last week where I think it was the legal representation for the Tudley village, or approaching that, was talking about 323 brownfield sites, I believe, that were rejected by the council, for which they had examined some of them and considered them viable. Now, I understand, obviously, the council is going to take a different position on that, which is why they rejected them in the first place. However, given what we're talking about, losing this precious remaining greenbelt area, until that is done exhaustively, and I don't think that this particular parcel of land should even be in consideration. I think, furthermore, speaking with our local councillor, with regards to the brownfield site specifically, I understand that within the last year or two, I believe, I could be wrong on that, there were 2 government grants available to local councillors to pursue brownfield sites. Tunbridge Wells Borough Council applied for neither of these. That seems to me a suggestion of their approach, which at best, I would suggest it is inadequate. All of these sites should be thoroughly tested and tested again before any greenbelt land is given up. I believe that ours has been given up because it's only has 2 developers behind it, and it's seen as an easy choice. When has an easy choice ever been the correct path? The second point I would like to make is around density, which was brought up again in yesterday's hearings. And to quote back to what you said, Matthew, city centres should maximise density standards. I got the impression from listening to yesterday's hearings that you have concerns that densities haven't been maximised in the more centralised urban areas. I suggest, and I would like to think, that as a result of this consultation period, that the council will be advised that they need to look more carefully at the proposed density of approved sites. I would also like to think that they will be asked to look again at the lack of brownfield sites that are proposed. So the point and the reason why I'm saying both of these together at the same point is these are obviously inextricably linked, right? They're a multiplier factor. So taken together, I have absolutely no doubt that if this is the outcome of this process, that the council is going to find a significant increase in dwellings that are available that don't require the loss of greenbelt land. So once this is done, and there's no turning back, this land should be kept as the buffer. It should be kept as greenbelt. It always was at the high level of greenbelt land, and it should return to that status. And then my final point is that there's a document that the council published last month, Matter 9, Housing Land Supply. And it talks about a buffer that currently exists. And the median buffer number was 1,048 dwellings. Now, again, this whole process is new to me, but if we have a buffer in place, before we get into the idea of windfall and re-examining current sites, any building work that is going to demolish precious greenbelt land should never occur until all of those options are exhausted. And for those reasons, I don't believe that this site should remain within the current planning process. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, Mr. Buckwell, please.
Yeah, thank you, sir. It's obviously important that Tunbridge Wells as a town takes its fair share of the local plan need. It is the most sustainable settlement within Tunbridge Wells. And so it's important that it provides a range of different sites. And I think, there are always going to be brownfield sites that come forward. By their nature, they do come forward over time, but the local plan has to look at what is known right now rather than speculating about what might happen to buildings further down the line. I mean, the shopping centre was mentioned. We don't know what's going to happen with the shopping centre at the moment. And it's important that there are a variety of sites for different types of housing as well. A lot of urban brownfield sites tend to be better suited to flatted developments, which tend to be 1 and 2 bed developments, which is fine, and that's important to meet that need too. But what happens when the people living in those flats and living in the 2 up, 2 down terraced houses in Tunbridge Wells, when they want to start a family and want 3 and 4 bedroom houses, they need somewhere to go to as well. So it's all about having it's important to have that mix of sites in the plan, which is what Tunbridge Wells are doing here.
Okay, and finally, anything from the council to add from what we've heard from people this morning on this topic?
So I won't repeat the council's considerations in relation to the strategic considerations that are fed into the proposals for greenbelt release. We've covered those in previous sessions, including how the council has looked at the other sites that have been suggested as suitable brownfield developments, and in many instances were simply not suitable or indeed available. I will pick up, sir, just on the point about the funding which was mentioned for brownfield land developments. That's the Brownfield Land Release Fund, I understand, of 2021. The council considered that and whether to apply for it. It relates specifically to the release of local authority owned land that by the end of March 2024 for housing development that otherwise would not come forward during that period. And so the council does not, to be blunt, does not have such land that will not come forward otherwise. So that the council did not make an application because it would not have met the relevant criteria in relation to that fund, or indeed the related fund, which again is for brownfield land owned by the local authority in relation to custom and self-build housing.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to take a break. I noticed, Mr. Averios, you've got your hand up. Is that from before? Just mindful, I think everyone's had a sort of fair chance from both sides to put their points across this morning, but is there anything you wanted to add?
Yes, the one thing I wanted to add is on the critical requirement for release of greenbelt land. I've been looking at the Tunbridge Wells's housing supply trajectory and that which became available a week or so ago, and on that figure, on that plan, it shows at the current time the buffer which is included in the trajectory, which increases by 60 or 70 houses a year, currently stands at about 260 houses. At the end of 5 years of the new plan, it's projected to stand at 1,250 houses. At the end of 9 years into the plan, it reaches its peak on these figures at about 2,000 houses, and then it declines over the last 5 years of the plan to about the 1,200 figure, which is talked about as the mean of the buffer. Now, on that, given that those figures in their buffer, I cannot see any way that after at the end of 5 years, when the buffer is £1,250, they've shown that there's an absolute necessity to release 100 this land from the greenbelt of 100 houses.
Yeah, and I think this is the point that Mr. Rook was making, and it's a point that has been made throughout this examination, and one that I'll certainly need to take into consideration. It's this issue about sort of the buffer and how much housing you're actually providing compared to your housing needs, and we had a good debate about this in, I think, one of the earlier weeks of the examination. There was certainly reference to the Guildford case where this was considered. So this is something that's firmly in my view, and certainly something that I'm well aware of. So we don't need to go over that again.
Well, it's just the aspect that after of the 5 yearly review, and the fact that these decisions don't have to, or in my view, don't have to be taken now and remove the greenbelt now, when it's possible to park the land, and it's that side of it which the council seemed to be totally against any delays in allocations, and which I find I can't understand.
Okay, thank you. Points noted. And finally, Mr. Dunn, anything before we break?
I just wanted to know whether you're intending to continue this topic after the break, or is this the end of it?
No, we'll take a break and then we'll move on to the other sites to get through this morning.
In which case, I would like to ask you 2 questions, please. Relating back to the discussion on the council's decision in February last year, about which Mr. Rick raised, and I should say that the Southborough Society entirely supports everything that the Residents Association put in. That decision was in February. Since then, there have been 2 local elections. The council now is a completely different formation to what it was then. The first question is, regarding this particular site, if the council were so minded to vote to restore the site's original greenbelt status, could it do so? And secondly, if it did do so, could it be challenged by a developer? Thank you.
So the council has the council submitted what it considers to be a sound plan. So the council submits for examination to the Secretary of State what it considers to be a sound plan, and the council says, this is our plan, this is what we want to adopt. And the process of this examination and myself going through all the issues is to test those issues and understand, obviously, concerns from all sides. And then I will make a recommendation to the local planning authority. So I can either say to a local planning authority, your plan as submitted is absolutely fine and you can adopt it. Or I could say the plan isn't justified or effective and shouldn't progress. Or I could say that the plan isn't sound and isn't effective, but could be modified. And we've been talking about some changes to some policies already. So that's my sort of the process. The three options that a planning inspector can do is say everything's fine, everything's not fine, but could be made okay by modifications, or actually no, you should we would recommend that you withdraw the plan from examination. In what happens after that, so if we turn around to the local planning authority and say your plan needs to be modified, it's then for the local planning authority to actually choose to adopt their plan. Now that's my role in this process ends upon my report. So at the end of this process, I will write a report to the local planning authority. And if changes need to be made to the plan, it will set out the changes that need to be made. That therein lies the end of the examination. So what the council chooses to do thereafter, in terms of whether it adopts the plan, that's not for me to comment. So I can't really offer any comment on that, because that's a decision for the local planning authority. I'm here to consider the soundness of the plan that's been submitted, and that's as far as my role goes.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bourne or others, I don't know if you wanted to. That was a fairly high level summary of a local planning examination, but
I think that's appropriate. Mr. Dunn would like to take it up with the council informally. We can explain process to him outside the examination if that would assist him. Very gladly.
It's a submitted plan that I'm considering, and then I would make recommendations on conclusions on that plan. And then the inspector's report is the sort of the end of the examination. Okay, we'll take a break, and then so we've got some other sites to go through, but as I said before, I think the majority of people here today to talk about this one. So if people did want to leave when we break, that's absolutely fine. We'll take a break and we'll resume back at 10:02, please. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone. We'll resume and continue. So we'll work sort of back to the original list of sites then. So we'll take them in order as they were in the matters, issues and questions. Mindful there's obviously a few representatives now. First site we need to look at then is RTW3, which is the Lifestyle Ford site. So is this a site that was in or is in the existing development?
Sorry, so your mic cut off just, but you said, is it within the
existing development plan? So is this an existing allocation?
Yeah. So the status of this site is set out in our hearing statement on page. I can't turn it on. I can't. Says the host has stopped my camera being on.
Oh, right. Okay. Chris Banks is here on Charlotte's behalf. Mr. Banks,
Okay. Yeah.
Sorted
out. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so the status of the site is set out within our hearing statement on page 39. So the site was previously allocated within the site allocations local plan policy ALRTW 9, and that was for residential developments, and that was for 30 dwellings and office use as well. So we've reconsidered the site and we sought to allocate it and carry allocation forward, but in a slightly different form within the submitted local plan.
So what's the submission local plan seek to allocate the site for then that it isn't already allocated? What's the change?
The change is essentially it no longer includes the sort of B1 office use elements, but we've allocated it for 100 dwellings in the submission local plan, of which 30% should be affordable. And we set out in our statement the sort of current situation in relation to the site. We see at the moment it's a car dealership. We know that the operators are looking to relocate, and they're looking to relocate to a different location within the borough. So the allocation is dependent on that relocation of the car dealership. And from the most recent discussions we've had with them, they that's sort of ongoing negotiations they've got in terms of an alternative site, and we've been working sort of proactively with them to assist in any way in terms of suitable sites, and then sort of commencement of pre-application discussions when the site is available. There has been some informal pre-app over the current sort of recent years, but we understand that is likely to restart fairly soon once they've found a once they're at the stage that they can do that in terms of the relocation of the existing use.
And so if I could just add, it's been through that detailed assessment of the site, informed by or together with the pre-application discussions, which have been actually at a detailed stage, which has meant that the council has considered that there is scope for the quite substantial increase in the number of dwellings from 30 to 100, and conscious that this will probably stray into subsequent questions 22, 23 and 24, but it's through that detailed assessment that the council does consider that there is scope for a significantly denser development at that location than was allocated previously.
Yes, obviously it's a pretty significant change. So just in terms of obviously the obvious constraints of the site, then heritage, for example, design, character. How have you considered the sort of type and form of development that's going to be on that site? Obviously pretty high density. How are you confident that that's going to be an appropriate scale of development for that site?
Okay, again, as Mr. Bourne said, we've sort of addressed this within our response question 23, but I think sort of in broad terms, you know, we've considered the sites. You know, we set out the process in terms of the methodology that we've used in terms of those sites and the capacities through the Sheila process of what could be achieved. We've also looked at, you know, the location of the site. This is a very sustainable site in the central part of the main urban area. It's, you know, it's very sustainable in that respect, close to existing services and facilities, public transport network and the likes. It's also within an area where sort of the built form surrounding it, you know, there is a lot of, you know, sort of high density development in that area, and there's other schemes that have come forward in that locality that are of high densities as well. So that's all helped to inform how we've considered this site, as well as the, you know, some sort of early pre-app discussions as well in terms of looking at what could be achieved on that site.
And so, oh, sorry. I was just going to add in terms of the comments that Mrs. Evans had made around scale, density, and so on. The villas, former office buildings, etc. on Mount Ephraim are 3 to 6 stories high. In terms of the context, the site slopes significantly. I'm sure you've seen on your site visits. It has several almost levels to it as it drops down towards Grosvenor Road, and this was looked at in considerable detail through the pre-application discussions which were had, which included input from the council's specialist urban design and heritage officers. So that has informed the assessments, include you know, and as part of obviously the Sheila and other assessments, which ultimately has led to the conclusions around that change.
Okay, Ms. Baldwin, you've got your hand up. Is this a site that you've made representations on?
I'll take that then. If I can answer for the town forum, sir, okay, we certainly made representations supporting this initially, and we support even more strongly the revised proposal. This is exactly the kind of development and intensity and density which we believe is going to be useful for the town of Royal Tunbridge Wells in creating both considerably more dwellings and also more vibrancy in the town centre at all times of day and night. So we very strongly support this this proposed allocation, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, was there anything else from the council? I didn't have any other specific questions that I wanted to go through. I think a lot of the sort of development management policy requirements are similar, are they, to the existing adopted development plan in that regard? Yeah. Okay, we'll move on. So RTW4, which is land at St. John's Road. So this one's again a previously existing allocated site within the site allocations, and I think this has planning permission now, does it?
Yes, this site does have planning permission, as we've referred to in 2017 application and amended scheme in 2021, and we've set out the current status of that permission. There's work started on site, and there's further discharging conditions carried out at the moment.
What's the stage of construction on this one? So mindful that it's work started, but is it still, how far have they got with it? Is it relatively early stage?
So groundworks, so
Groundworks,
yeah,
right, okay.
it's fairly early, fairly early stage. The most recent update from the case officer who's been dealing with it was that the agent's close to submitting remaining prior to commencement of above groundworks conditions. So yeah.
But just to be clear, sir, and again, I'm sure you've seen it, demolition has occurred, and the considerable excavation to remove contaminated land, etc. When I looked again at the weekend, there was construction activity on site at that time.
Okay, thank you. I'm not on mute now. Okay, so talked about that one. We talked about RTW5 already. So up at Grosvenor Road, RTW6. This is another one, I believe, with certainly outline planning permission.
Yes. Yeah, this has got outline planning permission, which was granted in March 2022. We've got a reserve matters application that was submitted in April that's still being considered by the council.
And does that reflect the allocation in terms of numbers, indicative policy requirements, etc.?
Yes, it does. Yeah, the permission is for 44 dwellings, and the allocation is for 40 to 45 dwellings. So yes, it reflects that, and obviously the criteria set out in policy AL RTW6 were used to inform the consideration of that planning application.
Mr. Jones.
Hi, so sorry. Our hand actually went up for RTW4, but it all just moved on. We had a very simple point to make. It's one of the sites that isn't allocated for extra care in the list of extra care allocations, but is one of the additional sites that was referred to yesterday, forming part of the council's additional extra care allocation that's come forward. It's in our evidence, but when you're adding up the numbers and determining whether sufficient sites have been allocated to meet the extra care need, we just ask you to look at the planning permission that has been granted and be satisfied that this is an extra care development. It's been approved as C3 and doesn't have any specific obligations to provide any level of care, although we understand it is being marketed to provide retirement housing. It's just a very simple point. And we have, we have nothing on the site you're currently discussing.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Borland or your colleague?
Thank you, sir. Just again, to support this allocation on behalf of the Tunbridge Wells Town Forum. Again, we think that this very sustainable site, which is on a bus route very, very close to the main urban centre for pedestrians, and that intensification and density here seem to be entirely appropriate. So we again fully support this proposed allocation, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just bear with me 1 second because my laptop is frozen. I'm working with two screens. One of them's frozen, but the other one hasn't. It's all a bit odd. Bear with me. Okay, so I think the next site we'll take, I think it's on the list, is a former gasworks site, Sandhurst Road.
Yeah, okay. So this is, we've dealt with this on page 108 of the council statement, just providing a update on this site. Again, this is one that was allocated within the site allocations local plan under policy AL RTW 10 for approximately 170 dwellings. So this is another one that we've reviewed through the local plan process, reassessed it through the Sheila, and due to its very sustainable location, PDL site within the main urban area of Royal Tunbridge Wells, it's one where we've sought to increase the density on that site from, we refer to it as a range from 170 to 200 dwellings. So in terms of the current position of the site, we understand that it's surplus to requirement from Southern Gas Networks. They've recently disposed of the site to another party, you know, for development coming forward. So we understand the transfer of the land took place in early 2022, and so we expect to have some pre-application discussions on that site in due course.
So as you're mindful, it was an existing site allocations site that hasn't come forward. Are you confident that it can be developed within the plan period? Any sort of major shows?
I think the obviously the site was still in the ownership of Southern Gas Networks. We now understand it's been you know, disposed of to developers to bring the site forward. So I think that provides comfort that site is developable. There's criteria in the policy that do relate to you know, a number of factors, and one of those is ensuring sort of contamination. Any contamination on the site is dealt with. That's criteria 3 within the policy. You know, that obviously with a site with this sort of nature, that's something that needs to be addressed.
Okay, go to CPRE Town Forum.
Thank you, sir. Again, this is an allocation which we consider to be extremely sustainable. It's within very easy walking distance of High Broom Station and 2 local shops, also pretty close to the North Farm retail park. We very much welcome the greater density which is now proposed, and again, it's exactly the kind of site that needs to be brought forward to meet the housing need. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on. The next one on my list, it just forward, it's the Beechwood Heart School, AL RTW 9.
Yes, yeah, Land of Beechwood Sacred Heart School.
Yeah. So what's the position with this one then?
Okay, so this again is a site that was allocated within the site allocations local plan. We've again considered this site. It has planning permission, although we understand that the permission hasn't been implemented. There's been hoardings along the site and some work sort of done on site, but we don't think it constitutes sort of permission implementation of the permission. We've been in contact with the agents representing this site. Recent correspondence that you know, I think we've set out in paragraph 167 of my statement in terms of how they've been reassessing that site. And we understand that most recent correspondence that they may be disposing of the site to another elderly housing provider to bring the site forward. Obviously, we need to consider, the position in terms of the lapsed permission on the site, but the allocation that's in the local plan, is there, and any further application that came forward on the site, we could assess against that.
So what does the allocation, this local plan, seek to do? Seek to do anything differently?
No, the allocation is seeking 69 units. Residential care home C2 providing approximately 69 units.
So is this one of the and I know Mr. Jones and Ms. Miles, I think, touched upon this before in other sessions. This is one that's allocated for its retirement housing, or a residential.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, yeah.
So yeah. It's that sort of bit of a mix of the two.
Yeah.
Or either or. So if this hasn't come forward, you said that the planning permission has been lapsed. What confidence have you then that this will actually come forward within the plan period?
I think
doesn't sound like there's much activity on the site, if at all. This sort of lapsed, it's just boarded up, being left there. So what confidence have you got that this is actually justified allocation?
I think it's still a good location for it. We've reassessed it through the Sheila process. The site owners, we understand, are in discussions with another provider to bring it forward. I think it just comes down to the circumstances of one housing group and their merger and the impact of COVID at the current time, as we've set out in the statement. But I think the most updated position is that they're looking to sell the site on to another provider, and we understand there's interest from other providers to bring that forward.
So if I could just emphasise the detailed design process, which resulted in the consent, took account of the constraints which affect the site. References made in particular to criterion 3 and the high pressure gas main. We know that that runs through the site. We know that there's a suitable scheme. Again, this, as in a lot of the sites in Tunbridge Wells, the topography, as I'm sure you'd have seen, it slopes down towards the south and east. We know that a suitable scheme, including with the relevant car parking and other facilities, can be accommodated on the site. In terms of the deliverability, again, there are no apparent issues to that, with the exception of the fact that the current owners have not implemented it. And as Mrs. Evans says, we understand that is as a result of their particular situation rather than the site as a whole. And there is now interest from others in acquiring it and taking it forward, so that the council remains confident it can be delivered.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, sir. Just looking back at the appendix that was included in the council's matter statement 8 yesterday on older persons housing, it is a site that is included as a residential care home C2 rather than extra care, and I think that's consistent with what the council's saying and our understanding of what the likely use of the site, subject to a new application, would be going forward.
Does highlight that.
Anything else?
No, just it highlights the points that you picked up with how you count when you've got allocations for different uses. That's a point you've already made, sir.
Town Forum, anything on this one?
Just briefly, sir. This is a site which is a little bit more remote from the town centre, but it's on a main traffic artery, well served by buses. Also, we believe that the sloping down to the AONB to the south and east, that adequate mitigation is being provided for. So again, we would support this. We would probably prefer to see residential development, but a care home would be an alternative which seems okay to us. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Next one was the following one, I think RTW 10, I believe. So let's turn to that one.
Yeah, so it's ALRTW 10 Montacute Gardens, which is set up on page 68 to 70 of the council's hearing statement, and was to set out a status in terms of this allocation. Again, this is one that the whole area was allocated within the site allocations local plan under policy ALRTW 4B. And that was for mixed use development. Planning permission has been granted on part of this site for 9 dwellings in 2020. So the whole capacity of the site has been considered to be 30, and 9 of those have been permitted. So there's the remaining part of the site, that's still part of the allocation. So there's also a statement that's been submitted from the sort of agents promoting the remaining part of this site as well.
So which is the part that's got the full planning permission for the 9?
It is to the rear of, if you've got the site plan, Linden Park Road to the south of the site. It's the area to the rear of 1 and 2 Montacute Gardens.
Okay. One of the questions I asked was about whether or not that scale of development could be achieved on the site, given the heritage concerns. I think there's the 2 parts to that. Whether or not this allocation is developable within the plan period for that number of dwellings, given the heritage constraints, but also any sort of existing land ownership issues. So yeah. Just in terms of those 2 constraints, how have you looked into and considered them? Okay,
well, I think again through the sort of the process that we've carried out through the Sheila, and as part of that discussions with the council's sort of heritage officer and the evidence base that's informed the local plan have used this. It is a site that's sensitive in terms of the conservation area there, which we've acknowledged, and there's the relevant criteria within the policy that deals with that side of things. There is, the area is in a number of different ownerships, and that's why I refer to the statement that's been submitted as well on behalf of the agents, who are looking to bring forward the remaining part of the site. And we understand there are discussions with some of the principal landowners of those sites. But it's a site that is sensitive, but it's a good sustainable site, in the centre of Tunbridge Wells, in the main urban area, that could deliver development, taking into account those sensitivities.
Okay, any comments on this allocation? Anything the town forum or Ms. Borland? Yeah.
Thank you, sir. We agree that this is a sensitive site. We're pretty neutral about the proposed allocation. We would prefer to see this site along with several of the other sites at the West Station treated in some comprehensive way. But you have previously referred us to the issue of deliverability, which goes to the heart of soundness. And therefore, we recognise that there is a statutory problem, perhaps at the moment, in bringing forward the whole of this very important area in the most optimal way that we could envisage. So we're neutral on this particular one, sir. Thank you.
Okay, anything further that council wants to add on that one? No. And then I think the final one was the former plant and tool hire site RTW 11. So,
Yes.
and again, was this a one that's in the current existing plan?
Yeah, this is a site, so page 71 of my statement. This site was again allocated within the site allocations local plan. And that was for residential developments, providing approximately 37 to 60 dwellings, or for a range of uses to include residential and or A1 retail and or employment uses. So again, this is one that we've reconsidered through the Sheila process and taking account the evidence base to inform the local plan. It's one that we've sought to allocate at this point in time as residential, providing approximately 45 dwellings, so it no longer has the reference to employment or A1 retail use within the policy. We're looking to allocate it purely for residential development. You'll see also that a planning application, as referred to at paragraph 202, a planning application has been submitted to the council in 2021 for the construction of 40 retirement apartments and refurbishment of numbers 15 and 16 Eridge Road. So this planning application is currently being considered by the council. And by way of an update, I understand it's likely to be going to planning committee in later on this month.
And again, just in terms of use classes then, so what's the application for?
The planning application is for construction of 40 retirement apartments and refurbishment of numbers 15 and 16 Eridge Road to create 2 unrestricted residential dwellings. So it's the application's being promoted Beechwood Developments.
It's Beechcroft Developments.
Sorry.
So C3.
And again, just in terms of any sort of significant differences within what was being proposed to the site allocation, any fundamental differences that have arisen out of that detailed design work, which would have implications for future applications on this site? Was it broadly following the draft plan in that regard?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. Okie dokie. Any comments on that one? Yeah, Ms. Borland in the Town Forum.
Thank you.
Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry about that, sir. The proposed allocation does not represent, in our view, the optimum use of this site as part of a comprehensive redevelopment of the West Station area, but within the confines of the legislation and of your consideration. Clearly, we support the proposed density of development and the contribution that will make to meeting housing need. We just regret that it wasn't possible within the system to look at a better and more comprehensive development involving several of the sites that you're looking at today in that area. But that's how things are. So thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. They're the only sites that I had down and questions for discussions today. Obviously, you've got the hearing statements as well. Was there anything from other participants or the council that wanted to discuss at this morning's session?
Not from us, sir. No, thank you.
No. Okay, thank you very much. So this afternoon we've got a different session. So for those of you who are attending this afternoon, it's a case of logging out and logging back in again for this afternoon's session. And I think probably RTW 16 again. I think pretty much everybody is at that session for that site. So we'll just put that to the front and we'll deal with that and then do the same. So we'll deal with that, have a break, and then we'll come back and just touch upon the other ones.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we'll adjourn for lunch slightly early again, and we'll